Hey guys. Tonight, we're going to slip quietly through the mossy back alleys and crooked wooden lanes of a medieval village. You can smell the rain on the thatch and the smoke curling out from low chimneys. But the moment you step into the square, heads turn not in admiration, but in wary, sideways glances. You're not dressed strangely. You haven't said a word. But your face, well, that's the problem. Too symmetrical, too clean, too tempting. And, in the Middle Ages, that's the sort of thing that gets you accused of witchcraft, vanity, or worse, flirting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing the sleepy corners of the world come together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just after sunset. Your boots sticky with mud from the last 10 miles of travel. You're hungry, tired, and deeply regretting turning down that weird old woman's offer to stay the night in her scented hut. But the little town ahead looks welcoming. Well, almost. As you step into the main road, you feel it eyes. Quiet, measured stares that trace your every movement. You try to shrug it off. Maybe they're not used to strangers. Maybe it's your tunic, still bright from a recent wash. Or your posture, too upright for someone who belongs here. But deep down, you know what it is. You've heard it before. A face like that, that's going to get you in trouble someday. Trouble, it seems, has arrived. The first person to speak to you is a baker's apprentice with flour-streaked hands and an expression caught somewhere between awe and suspicion. "You looking for the church?" he asks. But the tone implies something more like, "Are you here to steal someone's husband or summon a demon?" You nod politely, pretend you're devout, and follow his vague directions toward the steeple. But even as you walk, you notice a group of older women whispering near the well, their eyes not leaving you for a second. One clutches her rosary tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Another murmurs something and spits at your shadow. Well, that's friendly. In the tavern, the energy's no better. You step inside and instantly feel the warmth of the hearth and the chill of the crowd. The local blacksmith stops mid-swig to look you over. His wife pulls him back with a scowl sharp enough to cut meat. A group of young men at the back whisper and elbow each other, not so subtly peeking in your direction. It hits you then. Your face isn't just unfamiliar. It's trouble. Not because of what you've done, but because of what it suggests. In a world where survival means blending in, looking exceptional might as well be a confession. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly believed that beauty could bewitch or if it was just a convenient excuse to punish people, especially women, who didn't conform. Either way, the results were real, pretty often equaled dangerous. And danger that gets handled quickly in a town with pitchforks and too much time on its hands. You glance around, trying to calculate your safest move. Sit in the corner, too mysterious. Smile warmly, too inviting. Scowl too aggressive. You settle for looking tired and vaguely disappointed in everything perfectly neutral, like a tired tax collector. You order a bowl of stew. It arrives lukewarm and suspiciously fishy. But you eat it anyway. Not because you're brave, But because making a fuss would be far worse than a little indigestion, every time your spoon clinks the side of the bowl, someone looks. Every sip feels like a test. And then comes the moment you were hoping wouldn't happen. A man with shiny boots and an even shinier crossbow saunters over to your table. His teeth are nice, which is already a red flag in the 1300s. He smiles and says, "You're not from around here, are you?" You shake your head. "Just passing through." He leans in. "Well, don't pass too slow. People might start to wonder why." The message is clear. You're on display. And not in a good way. Being attractive in the Middle Ages wasn't aspirational. It was political. It could be read as a sign of temptation, moral, decay, or even demonic influence. And if people believed you were the reason their cow stopped producing milk or their husband started smiling too much, you'd be on trial faster than you could say it's just my bone structure. Quirky detail. Did you know that in some medieval towns, people believed a woman's beauty could literally sour beer? Yep. Brewers blamed mysterious bad batches on the bewitching stares of certain locals. So, next time your pint's a little off, consider blaming Helen of the alehouse. You push away your bowl, pay the innkeeper with a single coin, and retreat to your rented loft upstairs. The mattress is stuffed with straw, and the blanket smells faintly of wet goat. But at least the door has a lock. As you lie back and stare at the beams above, you wonder what tomorrow will bring. You were just trying to pass through unnoticed. But now, you've become the subject of the town's bedtime prayers and gossip. Tomorrow, you'll try to hide your face. Maybe with a hood. Maybe with dirt. Anything to make yourself look a little more miserable. A little more medieval. Because being beautiful here, it's not a gift. It's a curse. You wake up to the sound of clanging bells and the unmistakable roar of chickens who, by the way, seem deeply annoyed that you still exist. Morning light filters through a crooked shutter, illuminating the dust in the air and the lumpy silhouette of that questionable goat-scented blanket. You stretch, careful not to knock your head on the low ceiling beam, and remind yourself today, you try to be less visible. The cloak you packed is more decorative than practical. But today, you yank the hood down low over your forehead. You smear a little ash under your eyes. Tug your sleeves over your hands. And stoop just a bit as you shuffle outside. Trying to ooze inoffensive peasant energy, it works for about 10 seconds. Then, you pass the baker's apprentice again, and this time he doesn't even try to hide his reaction. His jaw drops just a little, and his eyes widen like he's seen a unicorn or worse. A pretty woman alone, and not crying. You manage a tight nod and quicken your pace, as if late for something urgent, like church. Or repentance. You duck behind a merchant's stall, where baskets of onions and dried fish create a scent that's frankly criminal. From here, you can eavesdrop on the town square. 2 women are discussing you already. One refers to you as that showy thing, who thinks veils don't apply to her. The other mutters, "Mark my words, she's hiding something." Hiding something. That's the thing about beauty in this century. It doesn't just attract desire, it breeds suspicion, especially if you're a woman who seems comfortable in her own skin. Or worse, clean. A woman with clean skin in a medieval village might as well be wearing a sign that says, "Accuse me of heresy." Historians still argue whether such suspicion stemmed more from religious fervor or from plain old-fashioned jealousy. Either way, being conventionally attractive often placed you just one village rumor away from a torchlit mob, especially if you weren't owned by someone, a husband, a brother, or a convent. You make your way toward the market chapel, thinking maybe piety will cancel out eyebrows. The priest greets you with the tired warmth of a man who's seen too many sins and not enough coins. He doesn't comment on your appearance, but his eyes do linger, calculating. He directs you to the front row, a trap. Obviously. You sit, fold your hands, and try not to breathe too confidently. As the sermon begins, you notice a theme. Today's gospel is about temptation, about women who lead good men astray, about the devil's many disguises, including, yes, the face of beauty, subtle, father, real subtle. You try to focus, but your mind wanders back to that law you heard about in Bologna, the one where women were forbidden from wearing certain colors if they weren't married, because color implied availability, availability implied seduction, seduction implied sin, which, by the transitive property of medieval logic, meant everyone needed to mind their palate. Sumptuary laws weren't just about fashion. They were weapons disguised as moral guidelines, designed to control not just what you wore, but who you were allowed to be. If you looked too fine, you were accused of trying to rise above your station. If you looked too plain, you were suspected of trying to disguise your true nature. There was, literally, no winning. Take veils. For example, a modest veil was expected but too sheer, and you were scandalous. Too opaque, and you were hiding something. And heaven forbid your hairline looked intentional. In some places, even plucking your eyebrows was seen as evidence of vanity or witchcraft. Because what kind of woman thinks that much about her forehead unless Satan is whispering in it? Quirky aside, did you know some women in the 1400s plucked their hairline backward to get a more fashionable, high forehead? Yes. The medieval beauty ideal was balding by design. And if that isn't proof that fashion has always been a little unhinged, I don't know what is. Back in the chapel, you sense the mood shift. People are sneaking glances at you again. One old man actually frowns mid-hymn. You realize too late that your hood has slipped slightly, enough to reveal your full face in profile, flawless cheekbone. No plaglasion. Symmetrical eyebrows. The horror. You pull the fabric back over your head and practically levitate out the back pew as the final amen echoes. Outside, the sky has darkened, and a low fog curls through the narrow alleys like it's waiting to escort someone to a trial. You hurry toward the woods, deciding that maybe gathering herbs would be less socially complicated than existing near people. You reach a patch of wild chamomile and kneel, hoping the act of foraging makes you look less threatening. You collect quietly, trying to look like someone who talks to plants more than people. Which, to be fair, is kind of true now. Just as you finish, a girl approaches. She's maybe 9 years old, missing a front tooth and dragging a stick behind her like it's a sword. "Are you the witch?" she asks with casual curiosity. You freeze. "No," you say, smiling gently. She squints. "You look like the pictures." You want to ask what pictures, but you don't. You just nod, hand her a sprig of mint, and walk away slowly, like someone who definitely isn't cursed. As you return to the inn, you realize something heavy. you've done nothing wrong. You haven't flirted, cast spells, or worn emerald green inappropriately. But your face, just your face, has become its own kind of heresy. And in this time, beauty isn't protection. It's bait. You wake the next morning already exhausted. Not because you didn't sleep, though. Let's be honest. That straw mattress was less supportive bedding and more itchy barn accident, but because you're bracing for another day of surviving your own face, you pull on your cloak again, hood extra low, and tiptoe down to the square like a fugitive, hoping the baker's wife won't see you and start shouting about Jezebel spirits. The streets are just beginning to stir. Chickens are having dramatic arguments with geese. And a pig trots across the path with the sort of chaotic energy you deeply relate to. But then you hear it a sharp whistle, followed by a muttered, "There she is." You pretend not to notice, which, historically, is exactly what many women had to do in places where modesty laws weren't just social codes. They were enforceable statutes. Welcome to the delightful world of sumptuary laws, where your clothing was a declaration of virtue, class, and sexual availability. These laws told you what fabrics to wear, what colors were pure, and how much lace was too much lace before you crossed over from respectable wife to godless hussy. In many medieval towns, these laws were enforced by city councils and local bishops alike. And you better believe they had opinions. A single woman in Florence in the 1300s could be fined for wearing silk unless she was widowed, and even then, no flashy embroidery. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were about protecting morals or just another way to keep women under male financial control. Either way, they worked. Fear has always been a cheaper tool than fabric. As you slip into the market, you pass a stall lined with veils. Some are delicate, gauzy things that shimmer slightly in the morning light. Others are heavy, thick, and deeply depressing, like a portable rain cloud you strap to your head. You go for the latter, draping it over your hood, layering on anonymity like armor. Now you just look tired and vaguely haunted. Perfect, but of course, the town's not letting you off that easy. A local magistrate is holding impromptu court near the well, surrounded by guards and nosy bystanders. His eyes pass over you, linger for half a beat too long, and then continue. You exhale slowly. You've passed today's aesthetic purity test barely. Still, you're not safe. You overhear a new rumor floating in the air, like the scent of bad cheese. Something about a woman who wore her cloak too low and was dragged before the bishop. The implication is clear: if you dress too modestly, you must be hiding something. You think back to yesterday, your hood, your slouch, your refusal to make eye contact. Suspicious behavior, absolutely, but only because you're terrified of being too visible. It's exhausting. Every step is a negotiation. Every glance, a possible indictment. A flicker of eye contact with the wrong man, and suddenly you're accused of leading him on. But let's say you ignore him entirely, then you're cold, arrogant, and clearly working some kind of charm. Because what woman doesn't want the attention of a man who smells like turnips and moral superiority? You duck into the shade of a narrow alley and think about the irony you used to think beauty was protection, that it opened doors, earned favors. But here, in a world laced with superstition and deeply specific veil etiquette, beauty is a trap, an invitation to be controlled, judged, punished. Quirky side note. Some cities actually created decency patrols. Small teams of men appointed to patrol the streets and fine women who dressed above their station. These were real jobs. Like medieval fashion police. Except somehow even pettier. Imagine being fined because your hemline was 2 fingers too high or your sleeve had too many decorative beads. That's not fashion, it's a felony. You remember passing a girl on your journey here. Maybe 15. With eyes, like she'd already seen too much. She wore 3 layers of wool, even in the heat. Her veil, stiff and plain. Her expression frozen, in that tense way people smile when they're scared to offend air molecules. That was her shield. And you had none. Historians still debate how much these laws were obeyed outside of major cities. In small villages like this one, it was often less about formal laws and more about mob consensus. You didn't need a law on the books to get punished. You just needed one powerful wife or bitter priest to say, "She's not like us." And suddenly, you're on the wrong side of normal. Later in the day, you try to help a hunched old woman carry a bundle of sticks. She glares at you like you've offered to hex her donkey. "I don't take favors from women who think they're special," she mutters. You almost laugh. If only she knew how badly you want to be forgettable. The final straw comes as the church bell rings for the evening Angelus. You're crossing the square when a boy barefoot, smudged with charcoal, points at you and yells, "Witch bride." The adults laugh. But it's not friendly laughter. It's the kind of laughter that carries pitchforks in its echo. You hurry back to the inn, cheeks burning under your veil, heart thudding like a warning drum. You're not sure what witch bride even means. But you're fairly confident it's not a compliment. You reach your room, bolt the door, and press your back against it, listening to the muffled clatter of dishes and voices downstairs. In the mirror shard, above the wash basin, you catch a glimpse of yourself. Not glowing, not enchanted, just tired, just human. But in this world, being a woman with a symmetrical face and 2 clean hands is enough to make you guilty of something. You leave the inn the next morning, with your hood pulled so low, it practically grazes your chin. Your shoulders ache not from carrying anything, but from constantly trying to shrink yourself smaller. The alley smells like cabbage water, burnt fat, and horses with unresolved emotional trauma. You wrinkle your nose, but say nothing. Attention is the enemy. A guard stands near the church steps. He's got one eye that wanders and another that glares. As you pass, he murmurs, "Show your face." It's not a request. You freeze. You glance up slowly, tilting your head so the veil shadows most of your features. The guard frowns. "Too covered." He mutters, "Only widows veil that deep." And there it is, the irony again. You were veiled too little yesterday, but too much today. You apologize softly and adjust the fabric, trying to strike a balance that screams, "I am boring and deeply uninterested in every man here," while also avoiding whatever obscure modesty infraction they'll invent next. This balancing act, it's exhausting, especially because beauty in this world isn't just something people notice, it's something people interpret. And when interpretation meets paranoia, you're suddenly under moral investigation. The town priest doesn't help. His sermons have become oddly thematic. He preaches about women inviting corruption through appearance, about the dangers of being ornamental in spirit and form. You're not mentioned by name, of course, but everyone knows. Historians still argue whether sermons like these were part of a broader church policy or more of a grassroots weapon wielded by nervous clergy. Some say priests were just parroting the pulpit trends of the time. Others think they used these moments to police the community when the local constables were too busy chasing goats. After Mass, a woman named Marla approaches you. She's older, stern, and smells like mint and vinegar, like someone who doesn't believe in joy. She says, "You should come to the women's gathering this evening." For modesty reflection. She doesn't wait for your reply. Just hands you a thin pamphlet titled, "Virtue in Silence." That evening, in a smoky hall lit by beeswax and judgment, you sit on a rickety stool while Marla and her friends discuss sin and thread count. One woman complains that her niece is obsessed with hair braiding and is therefore halfway to hell. Another says her daughter was caught singing, and they had to dunk her in cold water to calm the vanity. You nod, like all of this makes sense. Then someone turns to you. "What brings you to town?" one of them asks. You say you're a healer, trained by a midwife who recently passed, that you're just passing through, that you're nobody of note. They exchange glances. One woman stirs her tea, slowly. "You don't look like a healer," she says. "Too clean." There it is again. There's a bizarre medieval belief, still whispered in corners of the archives, that cleanliness in women signaled deception. If you were too clean, too put together, it meant you were pretending, because real virtue, apparently, comes with frizzy hair and calluses. Historians point out how this logic gets used as a gatekeeping tool, ensuring no one stands out without consequence. You excuse yourself early, walking back through alleys that now feel sharper, narrower. A cat watches you from a low wall, blinking slowly, as if to say, "Even I wouldn't mess with these women." Back at the innkeeper's wife is sitting by the fire. She's not particularly friendly, but she's observant. "You know," she says casually, "you're not the first one they've watched like this." You pose. "No." She nods, poking the fire. "A girl came through 2 years ago. Too pretty for her own good. Said she was headed to the convent at St. Brida's. Never made it." You wait for more. None comes. You retreat to your room and stare at the flickering candle. Somewhere between the modesty reflection group and the innkeeper's story, a picture is forming. You're not paranoid. You're just visible in a time where invisibility equals safety, where a beautiful woman can vanish, and the town will just move on. Quirky fact time in some areas of Europe. Local records actually show fines or public punishments for excessive grooming. This could include curling your hair, using scented oils, or even owning a mirror. Imagine being punished because your hair looks suspiciously intentional, which is ironic, considering lice were practically a fashion accessory. You look at your own reflection in the little mirror shard again, this increasingly cursed piece of glass. You've done everything short of rolling in manure. And still, it isn't enough. The symmetry remains. The softness. The evidence. There's a knock at your door. You flinch. It's the innkeeper's daughter. Maybe 12. Clutching a scrap of cloth. "Ma," says, "wear this tomorrow." She says, "To look less blessed." You take it. It's a headscarf. Rough wool. Dyed a dull beige, so aggressively modest, it might spontaneously recite psalms. You thank her. Close the door. and sit on the bed. Tomorrow, you'll try again. You'll walk even slower, speak even softer, smile even less. But as the candle sputters low, you whisper to yourself something dangerous. It shouldn't be this hard to exist in your own face. The beige scarf itches like judgment. You tie it tightly around your head anyway, pulling it down low over your brow. In the warped mirror shard, you hardly recognize yourself, which is probably the point. Downstairs, the innkeeper nods in approval. Her daughter gives you a thumbs up so solemn. It feels like a curse disguised as encouragement. You shuffle into the street like a shadow with laundry. The scarf covers your hair. The cloak covers your figure. And your expression is firmly set to deeply uninterested in being burned alive today. A few people glance your way, and miracle of miracles look away just as quickly. You might have finally cracked the invisibility code. Of course, just as you start to breathe easier, someone calls out, "You there, girl with the scarf." You wince. So close. A city official distinguished by the fact that his boots match, and he's got a feather stuck in his hat, approaches with a self-satisfied swagger. "You've been noticed," he says. "Not accused, not charged, just noticed," which, in this century, is basically a misdemeanor. You follow him to a small, uncomfortable-looking office where two other men are seated. One is scribbling notes with great drama. The other is sniffing suspiciously in your direction, as if expecting perfume to leap out and seduce him. You sit when told, hands folded, gaze lowered. They begin with compliments, which is never a good sign. Unusual face, strong features, would attract attention even in the capital. You try not to react. Smiling would make it worse. So would frowning. You go with board wood carving as your facial expression of choice. Then come the questions. Why are you here? Do you know anyone in town? Have you been, and this is asked with the sort of tone reserved for goat theft or public nudity frequenting the chapel. You say you've attended service twice. You say you're a healer, passing through. You say you've done nothing wrong. The man with the feather nods gravely. Perhaps. But appearances are not neutral. That line lands heavy. In this time and place, it's practically policy. Your face alone could be interpreted as an act of rebellion, temptation, sorcery, or, worst of all, independence. Historians still argue whether local officials were genuinely concerned about immoral beauty or just using it as a pretext for control, especially over unattached women. Either way, it gave them an excuse to surveil, detain, and discipline for public safety. Of course, always public safety. Eventually, they release you with a warning. Remain modest. Remain unremarkable. The subtext, though, is clearer than Latin. Don't make us look at you again. You exit the building with that tight, brittle dignity of someone who just got mistaken for a weapon. Again, you wander for a while, legs moving aimlessly until your feet lead you to the edge of town, where the river winds through mossy stones and forgets that people are terrible. You sit on a low rock, pulling off the scarf and letting your hair breathe. The sunlight hits your face and warms your cheeks like it doesn't know better. A breeze catches a lock of hair and plays with it. Like nature, never got the modesty memo. And then you hear him. Careful. You'll get accused of enchanting the grass next. You turn. He's young, maybe your age, with a face that suggests he's either very kind or very stupid, or possibly both. He's got a satchel of herbs slung over his shoulder and a smudge of pollen across his nose. You ask who he is. He says his name is Corwin, herbalist, apprentice to old Brenna. Yes, that Brenna, now wandering since she passed. You exchange pleasantries, with a caution honed sharp by days of scrutiny. You're not from here, he says, which is becoming the unofficial greeting of this cursed town. You nod, passing through. He sits a little ways off, plucking petals from a daisy with alarming gentleness. They're scared of you. You sigh, because I have a face. He grins, because they think it means something. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. He tells you that beauty's always been dangerous in towns like this. That even Brenna, who was twice your age and walked with a limp, was once accused of bewitching livestock just because her skin stayed clear during a plague season. People don't like what they can't control, he says, and they really hate what they secretly envy. Quirky detail in some medieval communities. If a woman had unusually clear skin or lost fewer children than her neighbors, it was believed she had struck a bargain with something supernatural. Imagine being resented for surviving. You sit together quietly, watching the river carry leaves and tiny boats made of bark. Corwin offers you a piece of honeycomb from his bag, and you take it not just for the sweetness, but because it's the first kind gesture you've received in days. Eventually, you head back. Violent place, but heart slightly less heavy. At the inn, the atmosphere feels changed. Not warm. Exactly. But less cold. Maybe word of your interrogation has earned you a sliver of grudging pity. Or maybe everyone's just run out of new rumors. Still, you don't speak unless spoken to. You don't smile. You eat quickly. You keep your hands folded and your posture careful, like someone performing the role of harmless stranger in a play with no director, because in the end, you've learned the rule of the era. If you can't stop being beautiful, you must become invisible instead. You dream of mirrors that melt and faces that don't belong to you. When you wake, the sky is the color of wet linen, and the inn's cat is curled at your door. Looking judgmental in that special way, cats reserve for humans trying to disappear. You don't feel like walking today, but staying indoors only invites more whispers. Why isn't she out? What is she hiding now? So, once again, you wrap yourself in a woolen fog of modesty, tuck your hair under the veil, and drift into town. You avoid the market. Too many eyes. Too many accidental reflections in tin ladles or buckets. Instead, you turn toward the outer lane, where the cobblestones give way to dirt, and then dirt gives way to silence. It's here that you stumble across something surprising: a shrine. Small, forgotten, maybe even disapproved of, carved into the hollow of a tree. It's dedicated not to a saint, but to a nameless figure, a woman, tall and serene, with a finger to her lips, a symbol of quiet strength, or perhaps secrecy. Flowers surround the base, fresh ones, recently placed. Someone else comes here. You kneel out of instinct, not piety. There's something soothing about her carved face. Calm, unbothered. The kind of face that doesn't attract accusations or invitations. You whisper, "I wish I looked like you." But that's a lie. What you really mean is, I wish it didn't matter that I don't. Back in town, there's a new notice nailed to the tavern door. You edge close, pretending to inspect the weathered beams, and glance up at it. New decree. All unmarried women shall refrain from appearing in public with uncovered hair, unblushed cheeks, or ornaments exceeding 1 silver coin in value. Any found in violation shall be questioned for signs of seduction, vanity, or sorcery. Well, that escalated quickly. You retreat before anyone can accuse you of reading it too interestedly. Behind you, the innkeeper's son is laughing with 2 friends. You hear snippets. She wears that veil like it hides her thoughts. Maybe it's hiding horns. Bet she talks to mirrors. You'd roll your eyes if it didn't feel like tempting fate. Inside the tavern, you sit in your usual corner. A serving girl brings you broth and doesn't meet your eyes. You realize she's afraid. Not of you of being seen talking to you. Guilt knots in your throat. This place is too small for association to go unnoticed. Across the room, 2 priests are deep in discussion. You catch fragments, temptation incarnate, vanity's snare, and mirrors must be removed. That last one gets your full attention. You follow the whisper trail and learn that the village is enforcing a new church ruling reflective surfaces, even polished brass, are to be discouraged. Vanity, they say, invites corruption. Historians still argue whether mirror bans were truly widespread or just regional curiosities fueled by specific flare-ups of moral panic. But we know this in some communities, especially during times of stress plagues, droughts, crop failure. Beauty became the scapegoat. Mirrors, fashion, even fragrance could be framed as invitations for demonic interest. And here's the real twist. Some theologians claimed that mirrors didn't just reflect the body, they reflected the soul. So if you admired your face too long, you weren't just being vain. You were corrupting your very essence. Quirky twist. There's a recorded case of a woman in 14th century France being forced to carry a broken mirror shard through the streets while wearing a dress made of sackcloth. Her crime, brushing her hair too often in public. Let that sink in. She was literally paraded for excessive grooming. That night, you dig out your tiny sliver of mirror. You stare into it, half expecting to see the devil winking back. But it's just you. Tired, threadbare, still too symmetrical. You wonder what it would take to change your face, not metaphorically, but truly. Dirt doesn't do it. Shadows don't either. You toy with the idea of a scar. Then shudder. That's the world you live in now, where disfigurement sounds like relief. But even if you manage to become plain, would it be enough? Or would they simply accuse you of hiding beauty on purpose? There's no right answer. You realize this as you lay down, tucking your scarf beside the bed like a holy relic. You close your eyes, and the priest's words float through your head like smoke. Mirrors must be removed. You dream of smashing one into dust and breathing it in. Morning brings the echo of hooves on cobblestone and the sharp clatter of wooden wheels. A merchant's cart creaks through the main street, overloaded with apples, turnips, and moral superiority. You emerge from your room slowly, moving, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping curse. The veil is already in place. You tuck the mirror shard deep into your satchel, beneath dried herbs and a half-crushed pouch of thyme. You don't plan to look at your face today. You're not even sure it's yours anymore. It feels like public property, dissected in whispers, hauled into sermons, and cited in new decrees. As you pass the tavern, a group of boys whistle, not out of admiration. It's not that simple. It's mocking, performative. One of them cups his hands around his mouth and calls, "Tell your demon friend we said hi." You ignore them, or at least your feet do. Your jaw clenches, your shoulders tighten, and you keep walking. It's amazing how much energy it takes to pretend you don't exist. That afternoon, you find yourself near the manor. You hadn't planned to be here. You were foraging. But your feet, like the rest of you, are tired of circles and suspicion. The manor house looms over the town, with wide stone steps and guards who look bored enough to be dangerous. You mean to pass by unnoticed. That doesn't happen. A voice calls out low, amused, and entirely unwelcome. You're the one everyone's talking about. You stop, slowly turning. It's a man in a deep blue tunic, trimmed in silver thread. Too polished for a local, a visiting noble. Maybe. His hair is oiled, his expression smug, and his boots look like they've never met a puddle. He steps closer, tilting his head. Lift your veil. You hesitate. You do not want this. Do you know who I am? He asks. And, unfortunately, that tone is never followed by anything good. You do not lift the veil. He sighs, steps closer, and says something that makes your blood chill. Refusal can be seen as defiance. Defiance, my dear, is so very suspicious. There it is. That razor-thin edge medieval women lived on, where no wasn't just impolite, it was dangerous, especially when the man asking wore velvet and had the ear of the clergy. You remember something an old woman once told you, refuse a man like that, and you're either a witch or a tease. Either way, you burn. Historians still argue whether courtly love empowered or endangered women. On the surface, it elevated them. Poems, songs, the language of honor. But peel back the romance, and you find a trap. When knights penned odes to untouchable maidens, they often didn't mean unreachable. They meant difficult prey. A lady could be worshipped in the morning and accused of sorcery by supper if she rejected her admirer. You stare at the noble. Slowly, deliberately, you lift your veil just enough to show one eye, then drop it again. Just a glimpse, just enough to give him nothing. His lips curl into a smirk, not as pretty as they said. You bow your head and walk away before the rage can reach your hands. You walk until the town falls behind you, until the trees begin again, and the wind is louder than the rumors. You find a stump and sit hard. It takes a full minute before you realize your hands are shaking. Quirky detail for you. Some women during this time did try to fight back against unwanted attention, using the only weapons they had: sarcasm, fake ailments, even applying soot to their faces to look ill or cursed. There's one account of a noblewoman who faked possession just to scare off suitors. She was probably brilliant, or terrifying, or both. You return to town only after nightfall. The streets are quieter, but the energy isn't better. Windows are shut. Doors creak closed behind you. This place has begun to rot around the edges, and you're the fly they've chosen to blame. At the inn, the innkeeper's wife avoids your gaze. She slides your plate across the table without a word. The stew is watery. The bread is burnt. You eat anyway, because pride doesn't fill your stomach. That night, you lie in bed and stare at the rafters. You count the cracks. You listen to the creaks. And you think about the power that man had not just in muscle or money, but in implication. He didn't need to accuse you. He just had to suggest your refusal meant something dangerous. That's the worst part. You're not scared of being attacked. You're scared of being interpreted. You wake before dawn, startled by the dream of your face carved in wood on trial, hanging above a pyre, while a crowd chants in a language made entirely of stairs. It's not the strangest dream you've had, but it's the first one where the fire seemed relieved to burn you. Outside, the air is thick with mist, curling low like the town is trying to smother itself. You step into it carefully, file in place. Footsteps muffled by dew-wet earth. You're not headed toward the market or the chapel today. No. This time you're trying something drastic. You're going to the convent. The nunnery sits on a low hill at the edge of the village, its walls covered in ivy and repentance. The bell hasn't rung yet. That's good. You'd rather not be seen, not even by the pious. You knock softly at the gate. It creaks open after a long moment, revealing a face you don't expect, a young nun with wide brown eyes and the sort of expression usually reserved for startled deer or people cornered by distant relatives at weddings. She doesn't ask your name. She just studies your face, then your hands, then your shoes. You're the one they talk about. She whispers. You nod. She steps aside. The convent smells like beeswax, ink, and quiet disapproval. The halls echo with sandal slaps and prayer murmurs. It's calmer than the village, but not safer. Silence can judge just as loud as shouting. You're led to a garden, walled on all sides, where a dozen women tend herbs. Some look up. Most don't. A few offer small nods. No one asks why you're here. You help gather marigolds, pinch mint, and water thyme in clay beds. The rhythm is nice, predictable, safe, or so you think. Until you meet Sister Elba. She's older, sharp-eyed, and, clearly, in charge. She watches you as you work, saying nothing for hours. Then, as you're trimming a patch of lavender, she says, "Your hands are too graceful for punishment." You look up, startled. "I beg your pardon. You've never been beaten," she says. "Not properly. Not for the sake of humility." It takes effort not to drop the shears. She smiles. And it's not a kind smile. Beauty breeds arrogance, even when you try to hide it. Especially then. And just like that, you realize the convent isn't an escape, it's a microscope. Historians still argue whether convents were havens for women or cleverly disguised cages. Some orders gave women agency access to books, education, even art. Others simply repackaged obedience as piety. Either way, a beautiful face could still be a liability. Nuns who drew too much attention were often reassigned, punished, or forced into harsher ascetic routines. Being beautiful and spiritual, a contradiction, apparently. As the day drags on, the other nuns become colder. A few won't speak to you at all. One woman crosses herself every time you approach. Another mutters, something about vanity blooming like mold. It clicks. You're not being welcomed. You're being evaluated. Later. Sister Elba corners you near the chapel. There's a position open. She says, laundry duty. Isolating. Good for reflection. Her eyes flick over your veil. Though we may need to cut your hair. You touch your braid instinctively. She shrugs. It helps. Removes temptation. You realize with a sinking feeling that entering the convent won't erase suspicion. It will just change its flavor. Here, beauty isn't a sign of sin. It's a test. And the only way to pass is to destroy it. Quirky historical footnote: in some particularly strict convents, nuns were required to wear hair shirts under their robes to dampen worldly thoughts. One order even made them look into distorted metal sheets, ugly reflections to encourage humility. Not kite your average spa day. That night, you sleep in a small cell with no window and one blanket. The walls hum with whispered Hail Marys. You dream again this time. You're in a garden, surrounded by flowers with teeth. They bloom when you cry. The next morning, you rise early, before the bell, before the sun. You find the young nun who first let you in and thank her softly. Then you leave. No fuss. No explanations. The road away from the convent is lined with quiet frost. Your feet crunch softly on frozen leaves. The veil tight around your face again. As you re-enter the town, the smell of smoke and bread hits you like a wall. Someone is sweeping their stoop. A rooster tries to fight a bucket. The world is unchanged. Only you are different. You tried hiding among the pious. It didn't work. Now, you'll have to try something else. You return to the village with the slow, cautious step of someone who's just learned that hiding behind prayers is no safer than hiding behind scarves. The inn looks smaller now. Somehow, you duck inside and nod at the innkeeper's wife, who raises an eyebrow like she expected you to return, either bald or converted. You're neither, though. One came disturbingly close. Upstairs. You peel off your veil and stare at your reflection in the mirror shard, half expecting to see someone new. But no. Still you. Same mouth. Same nose. Same cheekbones. People apparently find so suspicious. You contemplate poking yourself in the eye just to look less symmetrical. You settle for splashing your face with cold water instead. No miracles there. Either. The next few days pass, like a slow-burn fever manageable, but clearly not improving. Word of your little convent visit spreads faster than jam on warm bread. Some say you were rejected for failing to be humble enough. Others whisper that the nuns feared your beauty might stir sinful thoughts during morning psalms. You're not sure which version is worse. Then comes the jealousy. Not the usual sort. Subtle and sour. This time it arrives with sharp glances, tight smiles, and that one woman at the well, Rella, wife of a tanner, who starts loudly thanking God that her daughter was born normal-looking. She says it as you walk past. Twice, that evening, as you sit in your corner of the tavern, nursing a bowl of soup and your last nerve, Rella storms in. Her face is flushed. Eyes blazing. She points right at you. My husband, he won't stop staring at her, won't come home straight. I won't say his prayers. You freeze. The tavern goes dead quiet. You hear someone's spoon stop mid-clink. I've been married 15 years. She continues. Never had trouble. Now, suddenly, he's at market every day, buying herbs we don't need, and pretending we need more fish. He hates fish. The accusation hangs in the air like a noose woven from old gossip and bad luck. You open your mouth to defend yourself. But Rella cuts you off. Don't you dare pretend it's innocence. That face, she jabs her finger toward your cheek like it's a weapon. That face is intentional. The innkeeper's wife tries to calm her. So do a few others. But the mood has shifted. You see it in their eyes, not belief. Exactly. But possibility. And in this town, possibility is plenty. Historians still debate whether such confrontations were spontaneous or orchestrated, especially when accusations conveniently erased other problems, like an unfaithful husband, or a village's boredom. But what's consistent is how often beauty was blamed. A too lovely face could be evidence of seduction, ambition, or supernatural manipulation, none of which a good woman was supposed to possess. You leave quietly, heart pounding so hard, you feel it in your knees. Outside, the sky is bruised with twilight. You barely make it to the alley before sinking down, back against a damp stone wall. For a while, you just sit, listening to the rats squabble, letting the cold seep into your bones, trying to decide if you're furious or just tired. A soft voice breaks the quiet. She's always like that. It says, "You look up. It's the innkeeper's daughter, the one who gave you the beige scarf." She stands a few feet away, holding a lantern with both hands. She caught father looking at a goose once. She continues, "Didn't speak to him for a week." You huff a small, accidental laugh. It's not much, but it keeps you from crying. "Are you a witch?" she asks. Deadpan. You blink. "No." She shrugs. "Okay. I was just wondering." And somehow, that feels like the kindest thing anyone has said to you in days. Quirky fact break. In medieval France, some women accused of tempting married men were forced to parade through town, wearing symbolic outfits like dresses made of torn veils or garlands of garlic to ward off lust. Garlic, as if halitosis was a moral compass. Back in your room, you can't stop thinking about Rella's words. Not the accusation. The assumption that face is intentional. Of course it is. You were born with it. And then you tried. Every day. To make it less, you wore dirt. You wore shadows. You wore silence. You begged the heavens to smear you into someone forgettable. But the truth is, it doesn't matter what you wear. Not here. Because beauty isn't just about what's seen. It's about what other people fear they'll see in themselves when they look at you. The next morning, you wake early. Earlier than the roosters. Earlier than regret. And this time, when you tie on your veil, it's not because you're ashamed. It's because you're ready. The morning fog hangs low, curling through the streets like a nosy relative that smells faintly of wet wool. You step outside with your veil in place, your hands tucked calmly beneath your cloak, and a thin wedge of determination pinned to your spine like armor. Today, you have a plan. Well, half a plan. Maybe more of a vibe. You head for the herb seller's stall, where old Corwin, the only person in this entire village who doesn't look at you like you're a walking moral dilemma, is already unpacking sprigs of yarrow and bundles of dried lavender. He greets you with a soft nod, as if he knows not to say too much out loud. Need anything, he asks. Casually enough, yes. You say, "A job." That surprises him. You can see it in the twitch of his eyebrow. But he doesn't question it. "Can you chop roots without mistaking your fingers?" "Not my first cauldron," you reply. He grins. "Good enough." And just like that, you're working again. Simple tasks at first. Sorting leaves, crumbling petals, measuring powders into folded paper packets. All the things you used to do before this village decided your cheekbones were a threat to their wheat yields. At first, people avoid the stall when they see you there. A few make the sign of the cross. One woman hisses something about temptation herbs, but slowly, something strange begins to happen. They keep coming. Because Corwin has the good stuff. His nettle salve clears rashes. His elderberry tonic helps the coughs. And you, well, you're helpful. You wrap carefully. You speak softly. You don't flirt. Smile. Or sparkle. You are aggressively practical. It's working. Sort of. Until one day, a woman approaches the stall and gasps. She's using powders, she says, loud enough to draw attention. On her face, look there under her veil. You freeze? Mid-honeycomb wrapping. She smells like lilac. The woman adds, sniffing the air like a bloodhound with a theological degree. You want to tell her it's just salve, that you spilled it on your sleeve. That lilac isn't even your favorite. But the crowd forming around the stall doesn't look interested in nuance. Historically speaking, medieval people had complicated relationships with scent. Clean was good up to a point. Beyond that, it was suspicious. Sweet scents, especially on women, were often associated with seduction or even magic. People believed fragrances could alter moods, cloud judgment, even lure men away from their vows. Historians still argue whether perfume was viewed as a health tool or a moral hazard, depending on the user's gender. But one thing's clear: women who smelled nice were considered dangerous. Even if they smelled that way by accident, the woman continues her tirade. She's enchanting our men with powders and perfume. That's why my husband forgets his chores. That's why my milk soured. Quirky interjection. There's a recorded complaint in a 15th century Flemish village where a man blamed his cow's infertility on a widow who smelled too sweet in springtime. He later recanted, but only after the cow got pregnant. You can't make this stuff up. Corwin steps in calmly. She works for me. She doesn't sell perfume. She wraps bandages and grinds bark. But the damage is done. The accusation is out. And accusations are like fleas. Once you've got one, everyone assumes you're crawling with them. Later that afternoon, a group of wives confronts you near the well, not with pitchforks yet, but with folded arms, narrowed eyes, and a burning desire for a scapegoat. You should be more careful. One says, your presence is distracting. I'm just doing my job. You reply. She steps closer. You're doing more than that. You think we don't see how the men look at you. You think we don't notice their silences, their sudden interest in cough syrups. You blink. Is that my fault? If you weren't trying to be noticed, another woman snaps. You wouldn't be. And there it is again. The medieval math problem no one ever solves. If you try not to be noticed, you're hiding something. If you walk confidently, you're flaunting. If you show your face, you're seducing. If you cover it, you're mysterious. Heads you lose. Tails you get drowned. You back away slowly, whispering apologies you don't mean, until you reach the alley behind the tavern. You lean against the wall, heart thudding like a poorly tuned drum, and that's when you notice it. On the wall, a smear of red clay shaped like a handprint, fresh, with a small symbol scratched into the palm, a spiral. You recognize it from a book you once read about folk protection symbols. This one, it's for warding off beauty. Someone marked this wall as a charm against you. You run your fingers across it. The clay is still damp. You realize something. This isn't just fear anymore. It's superstition curdling into action. You're becoming a story. A leçon? A warning parents whisper to their daughters. Don't let your face become your downfall. That night, you write in your journal, a short entry, one sentence. They want me gone. Or ruined. Or both. And then you sleep with your boots on. Just in case. The next day, the wind changes. You feel it before you hear anything, before the new rumor takes shape, before the whispers tangle themselves into sentences. The town seems quieter, but not calmer. It's the kind of quiet that comes before thunder. You're at the herb stall early, crushing dried rose hips with a stone mortar, when Corwin returns from a visit to the apothecary in the next village. His face is pale, paler than the salves he carries. They're saying your eyes turned green last night. He says, without preamble. You pose. My eyes are brown. He nods. Grimly. Doesn't matter. Apparently, someone saw you near the well at dusk, your hood low, your gaze intense. And now you're not entirely human. The claim spreads like spilled ale in the tavern, fast, sticky, and impossible to mop up. Some swear your face shimmered. Others say your voice echoed strangely when you answered a greeting. A child insists you floated. You didn't float. You stepped in a pothole, but logic doesn't matter. Not here. Not now. And then, just like that, it happens. 2 men arrive at the stall. One wears a battered guard's tunic. The other is dressed in the dull robes of a church-appointed examiner, the kind of person who makes bad days worse by asking leading questions and squinting like he's detecting sin with his nose. You've been requested, the examiner says, for an inquiry. You ask what you're being accused of. The guard just shrugs. They're not calling it an accusation yet. You look to Corwin. He clenches his jaw, but gives a tiny nod. I'll find out what I can. He says quietly. You go with them. Because refusing would be worse. They take you to a small stone building near the chapel, a place usually used to store hymnals and broken chairs. Today, it has a table, 3 stools, and 1 too many candles. A few scrolls are scattered across the table. One has your name on it. Well, the outsider with the veil. Close enough. The examiner offers you a seat. Doesn't sit himself? He starts asking questions that sound polite but feel like traps. How long have you been here? What herbs do you handle? Have you ever read any texts not sanctioned by the parish? Then he switches tone. Have you ever had dreams you couldn't explain? Has anyone commented on your presence, causing unnatural reactions? Do you believe your face draws unnatural attention? You stare at him. He's serious. And beneath the seriousness, there's a flicker of something worse curiosity. The kind that gets people thrown in rivers to see if they float Historians still argue whether these inquiries were formalized systems or informal theater, but the record shows plenty of cases where beauty was lumped in with evidence of disorder, especially if other people reported strange coincidences, misfortunes, or even just vague discomfort. One beautiful woman with bad timing could spark an entire purge. You answer carefully. Nothing elaborate. No embellishment. You speak like a broom simple. Useful. Unthreatening. Eventually, the examiner sighs. There's no clear evidence, he says, but vigilance is warranted. Has stamps your scroll. Watched. That's your new title now. Not guilty. Not accused. Just watched. You're dismissed. No crowd waits outside. But you feel eyes nonetheless. Watching from shutters. From behind doorways. From under veils. The mark is invisible. But it's there. Quirky twist. In some villages, watched, women had to carry items, identifying them like a wooden token on a cord or a colored cloth on their belt. It wasn't a punishment. Exactly. It was precaution. And of course, no one treated you the same again. You make it back to the inn. Barely. The innkeeper's wife doesn't speak. She just places your dinner down and walks away without making eye contact. The stew tastes like apology and distance. You eat in silence. That night, you try to sleep, but every sound outside feels louder. The creak of the inn's door, the snort of horses, the way the wind rubs against the shutters like a match against stone. At one point, you sit up and consider leaving, just walking into the woods, disappearing entirely. But where would you go? The next town might be worse. Or maybe they've already heard. You lie back down and whisper the name of the woman carved into the shrine tree, the silent one with the closed lips and the serene face. You whisper it like a spell you don't fully believe in. Then you blow out the candle. And for a moment, in the dark, you almost understand why people once believed that a beautiful face could summon misfortune, because sometimes it does. You don't speak for most of the next day, not because your voice is gone, but because your words feel heavy, like they might be used as evidence later. You wrap yourself in silence the way others wrap themselves in cloaks. It fits you better now anyway. The watched stamp doesn't leave a mark on your skin, but you carry it in the way people look at you, or more precisely, in how they don't. The innkeeper's wife avoids you. The stable boy averts his eyes. Even Corwin keeps his words brief, though his gaze lingers with quiet worry. You try to focus on work. Herbs still need drying. Yars still need labeling. But even among the calming scent of chamomile and fennel seed, your thoughts twist. That afternoon, a woman approaches the stall. Thin, frame, trembling hands, a bruised look around her eyes that she tries to hide with a veil too sheer to be modest. She places a coin on the table. Something for pain, she says softly. You pass her a pouch of poppy-infused clove. She doesn't thank you. She just clutches it and walks away quickly, glancing over her shoulder like someone expecting trouble to follow. Corwin watches her leave. Then he sighs. She used to come here with her husband, he murmurs. Before he decided the devil made her barren. You blink. She's not. He shrugs. Doesn't matter. He told the priest. The priest told the town. Now everyone watches her like she might poison the well. You exhale slowly. Another one. Then. Another what? You hesitate. Then say it, woman who's guilty of existing wrong. Corwin doesn't laugh. Just nods. Historians still argue whether accusations of infertility or unnatural behavior were truly believed or just socially weaponized. Either way, beauty, illness, and independence all fell into the same suspicious category, especially when a woman didn't produce children fast enough or stayed too long unmarried. The logic was circular if a woman failed to conform. She was already unnatural. You spend the evening walking the edge of town. The hills are quieter. The mist rolls low, softening everything, even your thoughts. For a few moments, you almost feel invisible again, this time on your own terms. Then you see them. A group of people gathered around a tree on the hill's edge. They're murmuring something. You hear phrases like justice and warning. They scatter when they spot you approaching, which is never comforting. When you reach the tree, your stomach drops. There, nailed crudely into the bark, is a wooden token, about the size of your palm. Burned into it is a face. Not your face exactly, but close enough veiled, angular, and with one eye colored green, the other gouged out entirely. Beneath it, in a shaky scrawl, too lovely to be trusted, too silent to be clean. You don't touch it. You just stare. You hear footsteps. It's Corwin again. Of course it is. He doesn't speak at first. Just stands beside you, arms crossed. Finally, he says, "They're building a narrative." Of what? He looks at you. That your beauty isn't yours. That it's borrowed, bought, given by something dark. You swallow. So if I'm not cursed, I'm a witch. He sighs. Or you're just inconvenient. Quirky detail. There's record of a healer in Wales who was accused not for her potions or predictions, but for being too gentle on the eyes. Especially during an outbreak. Villagers claimed she must be hiding something, because no one that beautiful could remain so untouched by sickness. Back in the village, you notice small things changing. People hang new herbs above their doors, rue, yarrow, angelica, not for spring, but for protection. Some press them into wax seals. Others burn them at thresholds. They say it's to ward off fever. You know better. The priest's sermons shift again. Now he speaks of temptress healers, women who offer comfort as a trap, who sell sweetness. But plein ruin. He never says your name. He doesn't have to. You're not welcome at the stall anymore. Corwin tries to argue, but the townspeople complain. Loudly. Enough that he knows what would happen if he refused. So he tells you gently that it's safer if you stop coming. You nod. You even smile. You thank him for everything. Then you leave, before your eyes betray what your mouth won't. You walk without a destination. Past the market. Past the chapel. Past the whispers. You keep walking until you reach the woods again, where the trees don't ask questions and the wind doesn't mind your face. You sit on a fallen log, listening to birds that don't know what it means to be watched. And for the first time in days, you let yourself cry, not because you're weak, because you're still you, and they don't know what to do with that. The forest doesn't care what you look like. It welcomes you with cracked bark and tangled roots, with insects that ignore your social standing, and birds that judge no one except perhaps worms. You spend the night beneath a pine that leans like it. 2. Is tired of holding itself up. The stars peek between the branches. You try not to imagine they're watching you. 2. By morning, you're colder, stiffer, and hungrier, but strangely calmer. You braid your hair back tightly, tuck it into your hood, and head toward the river. There's a crossing a few miles upstream, where traders sometimes pass. You don't know what you'll do yet. Leave. Hide. Barter for a ride. But the town behind you no longer feels survivable. On the way there, you pass a shrine. Not the serene woman in the tree you saw before. This one's much older. More primitive, a lump of carved stone. Moss-covered. Depicting what could be a face, or could be just erosion with ambition. At its feet, wilted garlands, burnt offerings, scraps of bone. This is not the holy kind of shrine. This is folk stuff, and someone's added a new offering, a mirror shard. You kneel, not out of reverence, but curiosity. The shard is shaped like a teardrop, and someone has scratched a spiral into it, the same symbol you saw back on the tavern wall. You feel a shiver, but not from cold. They're spreading it. This belief, this myth of your beauty as danger. And it isn't just gossip anymore. It's ritual. You remember the stories you once heard in your grandmother's kitchen tales of mirror witches who could reflect a man's soul back at him and drive him mad. Of women whose faces summoned hunger in others, not just for desire, but for destruction, the kind of hunger that couldn't be named without shame. Historians still argue whether these legends were meant to warn men about temptation or women about power. Probably both. Probably neither. That's the thing about folklore, it shifts. Molds itself to whatever fear people most need to justify. You leave the shrine behind and keep walking. Faster now. By midday, you reach the crossing. There's a cart, a trader, mules, mud. The man gives you a wary look, then a toothless grin. You headed east. You nod. He squints. Got coin. Enough. He gestures to the back of the cart, filled with crates of onions and something that smells like hopeful cheese. Hop in. Don't talk to the mules. You climb aboard. The mules do not look like conversationalists. You pass the next few hours watching the landscape roll by meadows, farms, cottages that look friendly from far away, but probably judge your veil like all the rest. You don't speak. The trader doesn't ask questions. For once, silence is a kindness. But halfway through the journey, you spot something on the road ahead, a small group of travelers. 3 women, all veiled. One holds a staff. Another carries a satchel, not unlike yours. As the cart passes, they turn to look. One nods brief, knowing. The trader mutters something under his breath. You catch only 2 words. Saint's curse. You turn to look again, but the women are already vanishing into the trees, like they were never there at all. Quirky historical note. In 14th century Bohemia, there are scattered records of a group referred to only as the faceless, traveling women, mostly healers, who covered their faces entirely and claimed no names. Some said they were outcasts. Others believed they were guardians against the evils projected onto beauty. No one knows what happened to them, or if they even existed. By nightfall, you arrive at a new village. Smaller, less stone, more mud. The trader drops you near a barn and tells you to walk quickly and talk slowly. You thank him and step out, stretching your aching limbs. The village doesn't know you yet. That's both blessing and risk. You head toward the nearest tavern. It leans like a drunk sailor and smells like ambition drowned in beer. Inside, a man behind the counter looks up as you enter. You look like you've walked through hell. He says, "Twice." You reply. He nods. "Want a room or just a table?" "Room." He slides a key your way. New questions asked. You like him already. Upstairs. The room is small but warm. A real bed. A window. A jug of water that doesn't smell like it came from a haunted well. You sit down and look at yourself in the window's reflection. Faint. Warped. A ghost version of you stares back. You murmur, "What are you going to be now?" And the answer comes, soft but sure. You're going to be the version of yourself they can't predict. The new village greets you with indifference, which is a kind of paradise. No one points. No one whispers. You walk to the market square in daylight. To file. Half loose. And no one clutches their rosary or shoos their children behind barrels. It's almost suspicious. How normal everything feels. You sit on a bench with a hunk of bread and a bruised apple, savoring the freedom of being ignored. A chicken tries to peck your boot. You stare it down until it loses interest. Even the chickens here are less judgmental. But peace is temporary. Always is. It starts when a girl falls. Not just a stumble. She collapses near the well, her knees hitting stone with a crack. Her mother screams. People rush in. But everyone's shouting. No one's thinking. You move fast. Kneel beside her. Feel her forehead. She's burning up. Fever. You say to the mother, "Likely infected. Where's your healer?" The woman blinks. Gone. Died last winter. Then you need yarrow. Willow bark if you have it. And cool water. The crowd watches. You're calm. Clear. You take charge without asking. You're used to this. It's the old part of you, the part that knew how to help before your face became something to fear. Someone runs for the herbs. Another brings a cloth. You wet it. Press it gently to the girl's brow. She flinches. Then Zeiss. The tension around the square eases a little, but not completely. Someone mutters. She knew too fast. Another says, she doesn't speak like a commoner. And a third, she wears her veil loose. You think that's an accident? You ignore them. For now, historians still argue whether women who practiced healing were respected community members or tolerated anomalies. The answer, it turns out, he was often both, until something went wrong. When the fever broke or the wound healed, you were wise. When the patient worsened, you were a witch. Quirky anecdote, in 15th century Switzerland, one woman known for saving infants with prayer and teas was praised in summer, but burned in winter when the village midwife died suddenly. Her only crime was being better at healing than the official healer, who happened to be a man. By sunset, the girl's fever lessens. Her mother weeps and hugs you. You smile and try to say it was nothing. It wasn't. You saved her. But as the villagers disperse, You catch their eyes lingering, curiosity now tinged with wariness. At the tavern that night, you find yourself in conversation with a young man, quiet, kind-eyed, and smarter than he lets on. "You're not from here," he says gently. "Correct." "You've got healer's hands." Also correct. He pauses. "You'll be called something else soon." You raise an eyebrow. "Witch?" He shrugs. "Or saint. Depends who gets sick next." You appreciate the honesty, even if it comes with a sting. The next day, someone leaves a basket of eggs at your door. Not just eggs and a sprig of rosemary. Gratitude. Maybe. Or tribute. Either way, you take it as a sign that you're not being run out. Yet, you stay. You set up quietly. Begin helping where you can. Sore backs. Stiff joints. Children with coughs. Nothing too complicated. Nothing too magical. You keep your hair braided tight, and your smile even tighter. It works. For a time. But beauty, like fire, doesn't stay hidden forever. Someone comments that your eyes are too sharp for a peasant. Someone else says, "You move like a nobly." Rumors ripple. Slow at first. Like a pot just beginning to boil. Then, one night, a man knocks at your door. His wife is in labor. Too early. Too fast. You follow him without a word. The cottage is dim. Hot. Filled with the heavy air of panic. The woman is pale. Trembling. Blood already spotting the linens. You move without thinking. Boil water. Fetch herbs. Grind bark. It's a long night. When the child comes, it isn't crying. You rub its back. Gently. Whisper the words you once heard from the old midwife. With the crooked spine and perfect instincts, you tap its heel. Blow softly across its lips. Then finally, it wails. The room exhales. The mother weeps. The father sinks to the floor. You should feel triumphant. You saved them both. Instead, you feel watched. Outside the door, you hear footsteps. Several. Someone saw you enter. Someone he always does. Historians note a strange pattern in records from medieval villages. Whenever a midwife or healer saved a life in a complicated case, her reputation teetered. Success made her powerful. Power made people nervous. Nervous people whisper. And sometimes, whispering turns sharp. You return to your room and sit on the floor. Back against the door. In your lap. The mirror shard from your satchel. You stare into it again. The way you did weeks ago, in that other town. When you still thought the problem was where you were. Now you know better. It was never the place. It was what they saw. And they're seeing it again. 3 days pass. No knocks. No torches. No pitchforks. Not even a loud accusation in the market square. Just silence. That's the part that unsettles you. The woman you helped with the birth sent over a basket of root vegetables and a note scrawled with trembling thanks. "The baby," she says, "is healthy. So is she." She signs it with a flower instead of a name. You want to believe things might be different here. That this village, somehow, resists the pattern. But then, while buying bread, you overhear a merchant mutter to a customer. That healer, the one who saved the child, hasn't aged a day since she arrived. You've been here a week. Another whisper. Doesn't eat meat. No husband. No church attendance. The checklist is forming. You walk home with your hood low again. Stomach clenched. There's a scrape on the door. Someone left a small bundle wrapped in cloth. You open it to find a twist of hair. Your hair. From your brush, no note. No signature. Just a warning. Disguised as theft. Historians still debate the significance of hair in medieval belief systems. For some, it was vanity's crowning sin. For others, a source of mystical power. Especially if uncut. There are tales of women accused of love magic simply because their locks were found in the hands of bitter rivals. Or husbands. You burn the hair in the hearth. It curls, shrinks, then disappears in a hiss. That night, you dream again. This time, you're in a church, not the village chapel, but some impossible cathedral of shadows and smoke. You stand before a mirror framed in thorns. You pull back your hood, but the reflection doesn't match. She stares back with golden eyes. And where your mouth should be, there's only flame. You wake up sweating. Pulse too loud. The scent of burnt herbs still clinging to the room. The next morning, a message is slipped under your door. They want proof. Say something at Mass. No name. You know what it means. They want public humility. They want you kneeling where they can see it. Hands folded. Voice small. A woman who knows her place. And more than that, they want a performance of purity. Not just behavior. Image. You go to the chapel that afternoon. Early. Sit in the back pew. Hood drawn. Eyes on the altar. When the priest arrives, he barely looks at you. But during the homily, he changes course. Speaks of temptation. Of false saints. Of virgins who walk like queens. That line hits like a stone to the ribs. Then he shifts again to the Virgin Mary. The ultimate paradox. Soft and beautiful, but untouchable. Humble and exalted. Mother and maiden. Divine and docile. Every woman expected to mirror her. Yet none permitted to shine brighter than a flickering candle. The Virgin Mary standard. You think bitterly? Historians still argue whether the medieval ideal of femininity, the pure, beautiful, but passive figure, was aspirational or oppressive. Saints were canonized for suffering. Martyrs were painted with open wounds and downcast eyes. Beauty was allowed, but only if it bled. You sit through the sermon, unmoving. At the end, you kneel, not for them, for your own safety. Outside, the sky is gray. A group of women gathers near the chapel steps. Glancing your way, you approach them. Slowly, carefully. One steps forward, not hostile, just observant. She asks, "Do you claim your beauty comes from God?" A question with no safe answer. Yes. You say, and so does yours. The group falls silent. The woman doesn't reply. You walk away before they decide what to do with that. Quirky aside, in parts of medieval Germany, women accused of vanity were forced to wear iron masks, grotesque parodies of beauty. With exaggerated lips or noses, they were marched through town as punishment for the crime of being looked at too much. That evening, you find yourself staring at your mirror shard again. For the first time, You whisper aloud, "If I weren't beautiful, would they leave me be?" The silence answers, as it always does. But now, another question forms. If you weren't beautiful, would you still be you? That's harder, because the truth is, your beauty is not a costume you can remove. It's not a spell you cast. It's part of you. Like your hands or your voice, you never asked for it to matter this much. Never tried to wield it. But that doesn't mean you can deny it either. So maybe hiding isn't the way forward. Maybe it's time to stop apologizing for something you never caused. Not to provoke, not to flaunt, but because submission has only ever fed their hunger for control. That night, you don't wear your veil in the tavern. You eat at your table slowly, deliberately, eyes down, posture straight. You say nothing. But everyone sees. The veil stays off. You wake to sunlight slanting through the shutters, painting your skin in golden lines like a fresco, halfway to becoming sacred. There's no knock at the door. No scrawled warning or mirror shard or fresh batch of fear waiting outside. Just a stillness that feels earned. When you step out, you wear your cloak open, your braid long, and your face uncovered. Note, défiant, not proud, just unhidden. The market feels different under this sky. Children chase chickens without pausing to point at you. A man sharpening knives hums a tune without suspicion in his glance. For a flicker of time, you're no one again. Then comes the murmuring. Not everyone's forgotten. You pass a group near the fountain, 3 women with covered heads and sharpened tongues. She's daring them. One says, loud enough for you to hear. She'll get what she's asking for, replies another, and then, the final word, or someone will give it to her. You keep walking. You're learning the art of walking without reacting, but inside, something crawls. You spend the afternoon tending to your herbs. You grind nettle. You pack salves. You mix tinctures. All with movements steady and exact. Like you're anchoring yourself one task at a time, until the boy arrives. His maybe 11. Freckles. Dust on his knees. He holds out a small cloth bundle and says, "It's from my mother. For what you did. With the baby." You unwrap it. 2 apples. Some soft cheese. A sprig of mint tied with string. You thank him. He grins. Runs off. And the silence after him feels heavier than his words. You sit beneath a tree and eat slowly. The apples are tart. The cheese is salty. The mint smells like kindness. And then your eyes catch movement across the square. A woman, standing still, watching. Not just watching, measuring. She steps forward. Pas les robes. A belt with a silver cross. The church. Her voice is calm. You've caused a stir. You nod once. I noticed. Some say you're blessed. Others say cursed. You sigh. Sometimes they're the same thing. She studies you, and you see at her fear. Not of you, but of what you represent. A woman unashamed. A woman who survived visibility. They want punishment. She says softly, not because you've sinned, but because they've seen you and don't know what to do with you. You ask, so what happens now? She pauses, then says, sometimes a warning isn't enough. And then she leaves, just like that. Historians still argue whether punishments for excessive beauty were codified or ad hoc. Most agree it was contextual. A shaved head here, a lashing there. Some records speak of noses cut, ears marked, even entire faces covered by forced masks. All meant to humble women who dared to stand out. You try to sleep that night, but the air feels thick. You dream of shears, of hands in your hair, of faces pressed too close, whispering, "Who do you think you are?" You wake before dawn, not from fear, from clarity. You pack a small bundle, just enough to disappear again. But as you open the door, something stops you. A girl, standing in the hallway, the innkeeper's daughter, pale and barefoot. "Don't go," she says. You blink. Why? She shrugs. If you go, they win. Children. They always know the truth before the rest of us catch up. You unpack the bag. Later that morning, they come for you. Not with pitchforks. Not with ropes. With shears. The same churchwoman. 2 others behind her. Soft smiles. Steady steps. A ritual of humility. She says. A public gesture of atonement. To ease their fear. You ask? Whose fear? She doesn't answer. You're given a choice. Submit. Or leave. You think of running, but you remember the girl in the hallway, the apples, the baby who lived, the mirror you smashed 100 times and still somehow carries your face. So you sit. They gather the village. You kneel. They cut. Strand by strand. Your hair falls. Your veil stays folded in your lap. Untouched. No prayers. No shouting. Just the quiet snip of blades and the weight of shame that is not yours. But they want you to carry anyway. When they're done, you stand, and even with your hair gone, even with their ritual finished, the villagers stare with the same fear in their eyes. Because what they wanted was your disappearance, and you gave them your presence instead. Quirky postscript. In some regions of medieval France and Italy, women accused of vanity or bewitching beauty were subject to public tonsure partial head shaving as a warning. But records also show that some women refused to hide afterward. They walked the market bald and proud, turning punishment into resistance. You walk away from the crowd. Your neck is cold. Your scalp tingles. But your spine, straighter than ever. The air feels different on your scalp. Every breeze is louder. Every gust, a whisper you can't quite ignore. You walk through the village like someone returning from war untouched by blade, but still fundamentally changed. People look. Of course they do. But now, their stares are confused. Not triumphant. They expected you to weep, to flee, to cover your head in shame and vanish into the forest like a beaten ghost. Instead, you move with measured calm. You braid what hair remains. You go to the well. You buy bread. You grind herbs. You live. That's the part they can't comprehend. At the tavern, the usual muttering fades when you enter. You sit by the fire. No veil. No apology. The innkeeper's daughter brings your bowl with a look that borders on reverence. She places it gently, as if afraid she'll break something sacred. You nod once in thanks. She blushes and scurries off. Later, Corwin arrives. He stands at your table, eyes scanning your shaved crown, your quiet posture, your untouched spoon. They did it. Then, he says, you nod. They thought it would end you. He adds, you raise an eyebrow. Did it? He laughs softly, with a touch of disbelief. No. No. It didn't. He sits, and for a long while, neither of you speaks. The fire crackles between you like a shared heartbeat. Outside, the village breathes. Something has shifted. Not just in you, but in them. Because what they expected was fear, collapse, obedience. What they got was presence, stillness, a woman who remains herself, even as they strip her of symbols. Historians still argue whether these moments, small acts of refusal in the face of control, ever truly made a difference. Most records don't mention them. But you know the truth change rarely begins with declarations. It begins with women refusing to disappear. Quirky echo. There's an obscure tale from a Baltic village where a woman, publicly shaved after being accused of seduction, stood in the market the next day and sang. Not a sad hymn, a buddy song. Her laughter reportedly made men blush and women cheer. They never shaved another woman again. The next morning, you visit the tree shrine, the one with the carved woman, finger pressed gently to her lips. She looks the same. You feel different. You kneel, not to pray, but to rest. At the base of the shrine, someone's left something, a bundle of rosemary and a mirror shard. But this one is different. No spiral scratched in. No malice. Just the mirror. Clean and quiet. You pick it up and hold it in your palm. And for the first time in weeks, you look, your reflection stares back, hair cropped. Eyes steady. Face still too symmetrical for a world that fears meaning and beauty. You do not look humbled. You look human. You whisper, "They tried to punish me with my own face," and the reflection, though silent, agrees. You leave the mirror beneath the tree. Let someone else find it. Let them decide what they see. That afternoon, you teach the innkeeper's daughter how to grind mint leaves without bruising them. She asks questions. Good ones. She doesn't flinch when your sleeve falls back to reveal the pale scar on your forearm, the one from years ago. The burn from your first try at boiling salves. Later, she tells you, "They say you're dangerous." You pose. Do you believe them? She shrugs. They're afraid of you. That's not always the same thing. You smile at that. Just a little. The next few days pass quietly. No more tokens. No more warnings. The village seems to have settled into a new rhythm, one that includes you, not as a threat or mystery, but as a presence, a fact. You still hear the whispers, but now they come with hesitation, with the sort of awe people reserve for storms that didn't destroy their homes. And then, one evening, a knock at your door, a stranger, travel-worn, veiled, tired. She says, "They told me you'd understand." You step aside. Let her in. She removes her veil slowly, revealing a face, not unlike your own clear. Striking. Burdened by the wrong kind of attention, she says, "They say I'm too pretty to be safe." You hand her tea. Sit beside her. Say, "Then you've come to the right place." Because now, You know the truth survival isn't just hiding. It's teaching others how not to, and that's what you'll do. The second girl stays. You give her your cot. She insists on the floor. The two of you argue once, politely. Then both end up sleeping on straw mats near the fire. She tells you her name is Lynette, that her village sits 2 valleys east, and that a visiting friar proclaimed her smile a temptation to the weak. By dusk, she was advised to veil herself indefinitely. By dawn, her brother had been accused of encouraging her immodesty. She left before either of them could be punished more. You believe every word. You show her how to dry sage properly, how to pack feverfew into muslin, how to balance pressure with patience when wrapping a swollen knee. She listens well, learns fast, doesn't flinch when the innkeeper's wife calls her the second one with a hint of warning. On the third day, another girl arrives. This one doesn't speak much. She carries a bruised journal and writes in it instead. You never ask what she's written. But one night, as the wind claws at the shutters, she leaves a note folded under your teacup. I never knew I was beautiful until they made it a problem. By the end of the week, there are 5 of you. The villagers call it the herbal house, sometimes with respect, sometimes not. You keep the door open anyway. Lynette handles the tinctures. The quiet girl Mila keeps the records. 2 others help with foraging, salve making, cooking. You teach them what you know, piece by piece, the same way it was handed down to you quietly, without books, with fingers and memory. It spreads. Women come from neighboring villages, some just to look, others to stay. A few bring gifts, eggs, soap, wool. Others bring stories. The girl banished from a festival for showing her ankles. The woman fined for wearing yellow on a feast day. Too joyful for someone unmarried. You create a place for them, not a haven. Havens promise protection. This isn't that. This is a margin, a place on the edge where the unwelcomed can still exist. Historians still argue whether women's circles like yours truly operated across medieval Europe, or whether they've been romanticized into fiction by centuries of modern longing. But fragments in letters and court transcripts suggest that informal networks did exist, women who passed along knowledge. Shelter. Warning. Nothing official. Nothing safe. But something. Quirky tale. In 15th century Wales, a village chronicler wrote about a group of unmarried women who gathered weekly to speak of poultices and psalms. No laws were broken, but when a magistrate ordered the gatherings disbanded, the village priest refused, stating, plainly, they heal what we will not name. In your village, people don't say much to your faces, but you notice small shifts. The market baker stops overcharging. The stable boy asks for help with his sister's cough. Even the churchwoman, she of the shears and the sermon smiles, passes you once with a nod that's almost human, but you don't mistake tolerance for approval. You've lived this long by knowing the difference. The girls still keep bags packed, just in case. Still, the village doesn't run you out. You think it's because they've realized something both terrible and liberating. You are not afraid of losing beauty. They tried that already. They tried to slice it off, shave it down. Shame, it's silent. And yet here you are, still whole, still human, still seen. You begin writing short letters, names of girls in other villages who might need warning, or invitation. You give them to passing traders. Most nod and carry them without asking. A few raise eyebrows, but take them anyway. Sometimes, girls arrive before the letter even reaches them. Sometimes, they've already heard, there's a rhythm now, a pulse. The village doesn't know how to name it. They call it a phase, or a fever, or a season of strange girls. You call it survival. And not the shrinking kind, the expansive kind. The kind where women stop apologizing for the space they take up, or the faces they were born with. One night, sitting by the fire, Lynette asks, "Do you ever think it will stop?" You don't pretend to misunderstand. The fear, she says, the accusations, the way they stare like you're always a second away from either blessing them or cursing their cows. You stir the pot. Slowly. No. You say, not everywhere. Not yet. She nods. Waits. But, you add, that's not the point. She frowns. Then what is? You look up at her. Firelight, warming the fresh growth at your scalp. The point is, we're still here. You don't speak the rest aloud, that you're all still here. Not because the world allowed it, but because you refuse to vanish. Snow arrives like a quiet ultimatum. It doesn't fall so much as it settles. Like the village has been gently scolded and told to hush. The herbal house turns colder, but never silent. The girls laugh under too many blankets. Curse crack jars. Stir stews that taste like stubborn hope. You chop wood with numb fingers. Your cropped hair barely long enough to catch the wind. The other women in town now look at you with something between suspicion and curiosity. Some smile. Some squint. None call you witch anymore, not to your face. Anyway, one morning, a letter arrives, folded thick. No wax seal, just a bit of twine and a pressed flower inside. You unfold the paper slowly. The handwriting is too elegant to be local. It reads, "You do not know me, but your name reaches far. They say, you keep girls alive who were meant to shrink. They say you walk the street barefaced and still sleep through the night. I want to learn. Will you have me?" You stare at it for a long time. Then place it on the table, beside the mint sprigs and mortar bowls, and smile. Another arrives 2 weeks later, and another. Some letters never name beauty. Some do. Some say, "They told me I looked too much like temptation." Or, "My sister vanished after the priest called her eyes unnatural." Your little cottage now holds more than herbs. It holds witnesses. Historians still argue whether women's resistance in the Middle Ages was organized or accidental, whether these quiet networks were conscious rebellion or just survival instinct layered in domestic routine. But evidence suggests they existed. Bread baked with messages scored into crust. Candles that signaled safety when placed in certain windows. Names passed in code during church hymns. The cleverness of those who could not afford to shout. One letter, unsigned, arrives with just 6 words. Is it safe to be seen? You place that one on the mantel. Above the fire, you don't answer it. You live the reply instead. There are still villagers who do not like you. A few who think your house is unnatural. That gathering beautiful women together must be, on some cosmic level, offensive, but they leave you be. because the old fears have shifted. Once, your face was a threat because it stood alone. Now it's surrounded, echoed, multiplied, a chorus of the condemned that somehow refuses to go silent. And then, one icy dawn. It happens. A man rides into town. He's armored, not with steel, but with parchment letters. Writs. Orders from places you'd hoped would never hear your name again. He wears the emblem of a regional tribunal, a ring of thorns around a single open eye. You know what he's here for. That night, he visits the tavern. He speaks of disorder, of towns becoming confused about their moral compass, of women leading other women astray. You watch him from the shadows. He says your name once, not loudly, but clearly. You return to the herbal house and light every candle. Lynette brings the satchel. Mila gathers the journals. The others pack jars and cloaks and tools, but you sit. You think, because this time, running would only delay them, and worse, it would confirm them. So you stay. The next morning, the village gathers. Not to cheer, not to fight, to witness. The man from the tribunal walks through the square with 2 guards behind him. He reads your list of sins, not practicing without license, not treason, not sorcery. Just disruption through beauty. It's almost funny, but then he declares the punishment public correction. They'll cut your hair again, shackle your hands, make you walk the square with ink on your skin. You stand before him, the villagers watching, some frowning, others afraid. And then, before he can give the signal, someone speaks. "She saved my daughter," says a woman from the crowd. "She set my arm," says another. "She taught me how to grind herbs," whispers the innkeeper's daughter. Now taller, now stronger. More voix, quivering at first, then louder. "She made me feel human." It ripples outward like thawed water through ice. The man from the tribunal pauses. He did not expect this. He looks at you, really looks, and realizes what the others have learned. You cannot be erased, because you are many. Historians rarely record these moments. They happen in village squares, on muddy roads, in homes lit with fear and defiance. But if you know where to look, you'll find them, women who were not allowed to speak, being heard anyway. You walk home that day unshackled, no ink, no blade, no apology, and when the tribunal man leaves town, you know this peace may not last forever. But it's enough for now, because beauty wasn't your sin, and silence was never your salvation. The days that follow feel borrowed, thin-skinned, and soft-footed, as if time itself is unsure whether to linger or run. The snow melts in slow reluctance, revealing patches of earth that smell like beginnings. Birds return in 1s and 2s. The innkeeper's daughter plants mint in a cracked clay pot and names it Mercy. You wake each morning with your hair growing stubbornly back, short and prickly as rebellion. No one tries to veil you anymore. You walk the square bare-faced, arms unbound, jaw set in quiet resolve. The tribunal man doesn't return, or maybe he does, but finds no one willing to point a finger. That's how it works now. You've become something the village doesn't quite know how to explain. Not saint, not witch, just a woman who refused to break in the places they tried to split her. New girls arrive in pairs. Some stay for a night. Some stay forever. Lynette paints herbs on the walls in flour and ash. Mila binds the journals in stitched leather, labeling them field notes faces that would not disappear. One day, you find a list posted quietly at the back of the chapel. It's not signed, and it's not formal. Just names, dozens. Each line, a woman. Each followed by a short phrase. Too bold, too lovely, too direct, too alive. It's meant as a record of shame. You copy it carefully into Mila's book and label it something else, the archive of the unforgivably real. That afternoon, the weather turns rain sweeping in sheets across the village. Thunder, booming, like angry drums in the hills. You and the girls pull herbs in from the windows. Seal jars. Laugh as water slips down your cheeks like absolution. When night comes, the wind calms, and a strange hush settles over the herbal house. You gather the women in the main room. The fireplace is low, but the warmth is steady. Lined braids Mila's hair. Another girl too new for names yet stitches a patch in your cloak. Then someone asks what no one's dared speak aloud until now. Would it have been easier if you were plain? You think on it, then answer, maybe, but I wouldn't have seen the world this clearly. They nod, not because it makes sense yet, but because they want it to. Quirky truth. There's an ancient folk saying, once scrawled on the edge of a nun's letter, the moon is more feared when full. It wasn't about astronomy. It was about women. You stay up late, writing by candlelight, not to explain what happened, but to remember. You write of the woman with the scar who walked 3 days to find you, the child who said your shorn hair made you look like a knight, the boy who spat at you once but later returned with his sick goat. Ashamed and desperate, you write of the names they called you, and how none of them were ever yours. And when the ink runs low, you sleep. The next morning, you wake to a village, not quite changed, but softened. An older woman asks for time without crossing herself. A merchant nods when you pass. A child touches your braid and says, like mama's but braver. You sit under the old shrine tree and breathe. Not because you've won, but because you're still here. And maybe that's the whole point. The world hasn't made peace with beauty yet. Not in you. Not in others. It still snarls at it. Tries to possess it. Punish it. Hide it. But in this small corner, you've taught it something. It forgot. Beauty is not a sin. Being seen is not a crime. And surviving that attention, that's not vanity. That's revolution. Word count 1. 191. Wind down. 300 words. Now, as the sky fades into its softest shade of blue, and the last embers in the hearth whisper themselves into ash, your breath begins to slow. The world we just wandered through, all the noise and heat and judgment, quiets down to a distant hum. The village, the girls, the shrine, beneath the tree, they settle like dust beneath a book just closed. Imagine yourself there now, not as the hunted, not even as the healer, but simply present. You sit beneath an early spring sky, face lifted to the breeze, the fear no longer clinging to your name. No veil, no curse, just you steady, scarred, and still standing, somewhere behind you, Laughter from the herbal house spills through the window, soft and full of things that once would have been silenced. Mint grows in a clay pot on the sill. Ink dries in the spine of an open journal. The fire has burned low, but not out. You are no longer trying to disappear. You are simply existing. And even that, in this world, is an act of defiance that deserves rest. So let your eyes close now. Let your breath find its rhythm again. In and out. Slow and easy. Let go of the mirrors, the murmurs, the weight of being watched. Let go of the names they gave you. You've done enough tonight. You've survived. You are still here, and the wind outside your window, it knows your name. It always did. Sweet dreams.